Kicking off the list with number 10, What If? The Juggernaut. Okay, to start this sad list, we got What If starring the Juggernaut. It was released in 1997, written by George Gonzalez, and we kick off in a world where Sentinels have already wiped out all superheroes. Great start. Plus, there's this toxic gas that's filling up the atmosphere, which will kill all of life. So things are beginning grim right off the bat, okay? And all that's left now at this point is just the Juggernaut. Now he's hunting down these Sentinels. He wants to die, but his own invulnerability won't let that happen. Kind of like Hulk the End, just a sad, strong man in a world full of rubble. So he sees Iron Man's helmet, he sees Cyclops' cracked visor. He's just walking down horrible memory lane. Then he meets a couple of surviving mutants and they're not in good condition, mentally. I mean, they're actually blaming Juggernaut for killing the X-Men. And it all ends with Juggernaut knowing he's going to be the last living being on the planet and that it's his own damn fault. And before we go on to number 9 for our next sad what if story, if you guys could go ahead and please like this video, or else we'll be on a what if you didn't like the video, and then it's going to be a sad video on all the alternate futures where you didn't like our videos. So please go ahead and do that, because that would be great. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to the list. Number 9. What if Cable had destroyed the X-Men? Well, this one just sounds bad right off the hop. So after Professor X came back to Earth, the team was never going to be the same again. At this X-Men meeting, Xavier gets in a fight with Cable, and then all of a sudden it turns into Cable and his crew versus everybody, and it was just this big brawl. Now they escape, but later on, Cable kills Xavier, Jean, and Scott with a siren bomb. So now everybody's deciding on what to do with this guy. Wolverine's team wanted to kill him, and Storm's team wanted to bring him in. Both are pretty bad. So the Avengers have to step in and fight their battles while they're all working their own stuff out over there. So the Avengers are like, just do your thing, we're gonna go fight your bad guys, just wrap it up. But eventually Cable and his team is killed by Wolverine's team. Number 8, What If Wolverine Battled Conan the Barbarian? Written by Glenn Herdling and released in 1990, what if Wolverine had battled Conan the Barbarian? So basically Conan and Wolverine switch dimensions. So we have Wolverine causing trouble in the Hyborian Age alongside Red Sonja, and Conan smashes Cyclops in the head with a rock, which causes the full fury of the Phoenix Force to be unleashed. So now this has caused a ripple effect, so the psychic rapport was shattered, and without Wolverine to hurl Colossus at her, there's nothing that prevents Jean Grey from transforming into her dark persona before she can destroy herself, resulting in the destruction of the entire universe. So just like that, Cyclops gets hit with a rock and then it all goes to shit. So yeah, crossovers are for sure fun, but you gotta look at the possible ways it could go poorly as well. Wolverine versus Conan the Barbarian is definitely one of those ways. Number 7, what if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? In this reality, Professor X is the one who becomes Juggernaut and gets buried. Now this causes him to go down a completely different path when it comes down to the X-Men, because after this, he never ended up creating the X-Men because he was stuck. So now the Fantastic Four wants to defeat Magneto instead. So Professor X, he's still listening. He's using his mind powers. He's knowing what's going on out there. He's kind of getting pissed that he's not able to go out and help. So he digs his way out, and his telepathy powers are now stronger than ever with his new Juggernaut super strength. So he takes over the country with his own X-Men posse to enforce these anti-human laws. So Cyclops even sided with Magneto at this point because he could block Xavier's telepathy. So they're battling it out on Asteroid M, and Cyclops is trying to remind Xavier about his original dream, you know, with humans and mutants living together in harmony. And before he could really consider it, the ground beneath him exploded and he got launched into space, probably forever. And man, that's gotta be boring. Imagine not dying in space. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. This should be number 1 maybe, I don't know. Number 6, what if the Hulk died and Kyra lived? Written by Greg Pak, released in 2007. Okay, so we start with the Hulk saving Kyra by throwing her out of the way of the explosion instead of the ship. So now the Hulk had died along with Crown City. And Kyra, she's pretty pissed, right? She takes all the old power from the planet and gets ready with her sights set on Earth. She's coming. First stop, of course, being the moon, where she defeats Black Bolt and then implants a obedience disc on him. So when Strange and Sentry come to the rescue, she makes Black Bolt use his sonic scream, which of course results in both of them dying. She's killing everybody fast, okay? So Heroine comes to stop her and says that basically if you kill everybody on Earth, nobody can honor your dead husband. So she says, fine, but you're gonna wish you were dead instead. And then it cuts to 21 years later, and she's made all the remaining heroes build this massive Hulk statue. And when it's finally done, she walks onto the hand of the statue and then turns into stone, joining him. The end. Yeah, how sad is that? I mean, I feel like it wouldn't take those guys 21 years to build a statue. I mean, if they're getting paid by the hour, sure, then by all means, go for it.
Number 5. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? One of my personal favorites and definitely a dark story. This one involves Spider-Man being fully overtaken by his black suit after Reed attempts to remove it. In the end, Peter is drained of his life energy by the suit, which does inevitably leave him. Prematurely aged by this process, he ends up dying of old age, with Black Cat being the one to get revenge for Peter by killing the symbiote for good. It also features a very sad scene between May and old Peter, who poses as a colleague of Peter's from the Daily Bugle and basically comes to tell Aunt May before he dies how much Peter loved her. This sad and tragic what-if tale comes from issue number 4 of the 1989 comic series, if you would like to revisit it, as I have. Number 4. What if the Hulk had killed Wolverine? This story comes to us from issue number 50 of the first volume of the Marvel What If series. Here, Wolverine and the Hulk fight, as, you know, is common, but this time, during their, what I believe is intended to be their first fight, Wolverine ends up dead. This is all because Hulk is being used as a pawn by Forge's powerful nemesis, the Adversary. Very creative name, the Adversary. I wonder what that guy's about. Is he an adversary? He certainly is. In the end, Hulk threatens the lives of pretty much all of the X-Men, but does not end up killing them all. Once the Adversary reveals himself, Hulk attacks him, weakening him briefly, just long enough for Forge and Storm to basically escape his clutches. They strike back against him, and with Forge managing to cast a spell to defeat the Adversary and basically seals the Adversary off in another realm, banishing him from their reality for good. Still, while there are survivors of this battle, when Hulk transforms back to Bruce Banner, Bruce is confronted with the fact that he has taken multiple lives during this rampage, and that pretty much breaks Bruce, so I would say this is pretty tragic. Number 3. What if the Punisher had killed Spider-Man? This comic has maybe one of the darkest endings around. In it, Punisher is tricked into killing Spider-Man. He's promised basically funds to help him in his fight against crime and those who took his family from him, and Frank is also made to believe that Spider-Man himself is a criminal and is not actually a hero. However, after killing Spider-Man, Frank learns the truth. He manages to track down the man who misguided him, the Jackal, aka Professor Miles Warren. He figures out that the Jackal is Warren, and insists that they wait for the cops instead of just, blowing Warren away. However, when the cops do arrive, it's revealed what Frank's real plan is here, to basically kill the Jackal in front of the cops and in return be killed by the cops, believing he deserves himself to be punished for what he did to poor Spider-Man. This all goes down in What If issue number 58 from the 1989 series. Does seem like a Frank solution to a problem where he blames himself or something. Number 2. What if Flash Thompson became Spider-Man? I was kind of thinking that maybe in this story, Flash, might get a break here. But even here, he has a pretty bleak tale attached to him in another alternate reality where he also becomes Spider-Man instead of Peter Parker. The story culminates in a heated moment where Peter discovers Flash's secret, that he's Spider-Man. Filled with rage, Flash doesn't listen to Peter's pleas for help and instead blames him for everything that has gone wrong in his life recently, shouting at Peter, "You ruined my life," before hitting him with a deadly punch that basically cost Peter his life. This story comes from the 2018 What If Spider-Man comic, and I would recommend checking this one out. It's wild. Number 1. What if Phoenix had not died? The title for this story makes it sound like it might even be a positive and happy story, but don't be misguided, it's not happy. Well, it starts off pretty optimistic with the Phoenix not dying but being redeemed and even helping to defeat Galactus. In the end, the Dark Phoenix power does consume Jean, causing her to turn on her teammates, so she becomes, dark again. She kills not just the X-Men, but the world in her rage and sorrow, with her anger and fire continuing to spread outward, engulfing the universe. So not only do her friends die, the X-Men obviously, the world, but the universe is also completely in danger. So yeah.
Number 10. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? Okay, I have to start with this one as it's the very first issue of What If, released back in the late 70s. Now the Watcher breaks it down how these things work, how these what ifs work, as he will in the Disney Plus original this summer with the smooth voice of Jeffrey Wright to accompany the beautiful animation. Now he explains to readers in all of these issues that there are multiple realities. And the first one we get to explore is where Peter joins the first family to make some dough. And yes, of course, they call themselves the Fantastic Five. Because 4 plus 1 is 5. See, we're alright here, we're pretty good. The Bugle doesn't hate on Peter, he's actually loved and respected in this story, and it's a good start for the web slinger on this long what if journey, but it's about to get so much more dark. Number 9. What if Spider-Man had rescued Gwen Stacy? Now issue 24 starts getting into the darker, but also kind of positive notes. See, instead of Spider-Man not catching Gwen with his webs, he ended up jumping off the bridge himself to rescue her, and then after that, Well, love is in the air. She's alive. Things are obviously much more positive. He proposes, he reveals his identity to her. Things are looking quite nice. They're so good. And on top of that, Harry and Norman reunite. Harry found out about his father's secret identity and put his life on the line in order to save his father. So they worked it out as well. So far it's like yes and yes. So far so good. Now when Peter and Gwen get married at the ceremony, they're doing the cha-cha slide, drinking some champagne, having a great time, and then J. Jonah Jameson just waltz in with a bunch of police officers with footage that reveals Peter Parker as Spider-Man. Also, what a dick. Like, that day? Do it tomorrow. Do it the day before. I don't know. The wedding? Not nice. Now this was the same tape that brought Norman and his father together, and it's the same tape that made Peter have to run for the rest of his life to protect the ones that he loves. It starts good, ends bad. Classic Peter. Number 8. What if Uncle Ben had lived? Okay, still in volume 1, now in issue 46, we see another positive scenario unfold, or rather it starts that way. Yeah. So Uncle Ben didn't suffer from back pain in the storyline, or sciatica or anything like that. He just slept comfortably that fateful night, which is great, but some things still have to happen. So instead of him going downstairs to check on that noise, it was Aunt May. So Aunt May ended up biting the bullet instead, and this changed the dynamic for Peter and Uncle Ben. I mean, obviously. See, Uncle Ben and Peter were quiet. Peter was for sure closer to May before she died, and when Ben figured out that Peter was Spider-Man, he actually encouraged him to continue and be there for the helpless, rather than, just doing it out of some tortured sense of misplaced responsibility. So Spider-Man becomes better and more confident, which is a great sign. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, because it does wonders for our channel over here at Top 10 Nerd. Thank you so much for your constant support. Let's get right back into this list. I don't want to waste any more of your precious time, although I'm still doing so. Let's go back in. Number 7. What if Spider-Man had kept his 6 arms? Okay, what if volume 2 issue 42? We're getting into the weirder what ifs now. And it shows us what the world would look like when Spider-Man from Earth 90-100 keeps his extra 4 arms. Now the trick to this problem originally was in Michael Morbius's blood, but in this what if, it shows us that Morbius never actually made it to Dr. Connor's lab. Instead, Peter just stuck with these arms. He had no choice. Now eventually he tries to figure out something. He goes to the Xavier mansion for help. They all attack him because, they don't recognize him. He has 6 arms and he's aggressive and upset. So Peter leaves them too. He's like, damn. So now he's bummed about this mutation even more, but he's easily able to stop Dr. Octopus. So that's, it's a nice positive out of all this. Now things finally get easier for Peter when Mr. Fantastic surprises Spider-Man with Electro Vibra arms that will make his extra arms invisible, so he can at least blend in. That's progress, that's fair. Number 6. What if Spider-Man had kept his cosmic powers? Okay, in my last video I talked about these alternate powerful versions of Spider-Man, and amongst them was this Captain Universe version. So Spider-Man doesn't have these powers for too long, but in What If Volume 2 issue 31 we see a world where he remained the most powerful being. Now he starts off retiring. I mean, first of all, he wants a normal life. So Venom, of course, knows that he cannot beat this cosmic Spider-Man no matter what, so he agrees. He agrees to take over for the Webhead after his retirement. So far, this is pretty wild. Peter enjoys retirement for a little bit, but in the end, he still feels like he has to help humanity. Now, at one point, he tries to demand Thor to make it rain to fix famine in all these drought-ridden lands, but Thor refuses as his oath doesn't allow him to do such things. They end up having a cosmic battle in space. Spider-Man literally punches him off the planet to start it off, and it's wild. They're both so powerful. Now finally Dr. Doom shows up. Well, we think it's Dr. Doom, but it's actually a Doombot. So the Doombot shows up offering to help get rid of Pete's problem, and it works. It works so well, in fact, that the spider powers leave too, and Peter is finally able to retire and have a daughter with MJ. Now at the very end, they look into her eyes, and they're all white. So MJ jokes and says, oh, she's got her father's eyes. How lovely. Now she's a god that you have to deal with. Enjoy.
Number 5. Marvel Zombies Resurrection. While not an exact what-if series, Marvel Zombies Resurrection definitely feels like a what-if version of the Marvel Zombies world that imagines a completely new scenario involving zombies based on established Marvel lore, where Galactus becomes infected with a mysterious new virus that it turns out was created by the Brood, dun dun dun, to infect people more efficiently, turning them instead into zombies. The whole series from 2020 and the intro to it from 2019 that kind of explains all of the lore that you need to know to jump in is all pretty bleak, with only a few people on Earth making it out alive in the end, and still fighting basically just to survive after the world has pretty much been completely infected after Galactus's corpse is hurled to the Earth to be used as a kind of zombie creating bomb. But while the story is pretty dark in terms of all the great heroes that we lose, do not worry. At least Carol's Flurkin cat, Chewie, stays safe. Thank goodness. In case, like me, you read this and you were worried the whole time about that little fur baby, I was like, no, please don't let Chewie die. Chewie's so cute. Chewie is also a badass, so really there's no need to worry. Chewie's like one of the best fighters in this entire series, which I love. Number 4. What if Clint Barton killed Norman Osborn during Dark Reign? This what if comes answered in the What If Dark Reign one-shot. Here we get to see what could have happened had Clint Barton's plan to kill Norman Osborn actually come together. Clint himself ends up making a martyr out of Osborn though, unfortunately, and becomes a wanted man in the process. One civilian decides to take the matter of justice into his own hands, calling out the assassin, Clint Francis Barton. And if he doesn't show himself, he threatens to blow up the entire Sunday Inn and all the innocent people that are inside it. Hawkeye does show up though and attempts to talk the man down, but surprisingly the man pulls a gun and shoots Clint point blank to death rather than surrender. He is taken away, and in the end Hammer remains in control under Deputy Director, likely now full director actually, Victoria Hand. Basically, if Hawkeye had actually killed Norman Osborn, it would be bad, I think, in the long run. I think that's what we learned. Number 3. What if the Kingdom of Cain? In What If issue 94 out of the 1989 series, also known as Volume 2, we get to visit a world destroyed by the Sentinels. Oh goody. The Sentinels did not only take out all of mutant kind supposedly, but also killed all of Earth's mightiest heroes besides, and its general population of non-powered individuals who were killed by high levels of radiation that the Sentinels emitted. The only one to survive all this destruction is Juggernaut, who wanders the Earth for years reminiscing on his past and all of his wrongdoings, and feeling unbearably lonely all the while. Poor Juggernaut. Magneto shows up and confirms that everything that has come to pass is Juggernaut's fault because he killed Professor X, which was basically the catalyst event for this chain reaction of destruction that has now come to pass. Juggernaut finds and kind of falls into a secret bunker as a result of his fight with Magneto, where he learns that some mutants survived and are actually hiding out. Yay! When they ask him to leave them be though, he refuses, only to learn that this was an attempt to protect themselves against the radiation, which he is now let in by breaking into the bunker, infecting them and ultimately sentencing them to death. So it's really sad. Juggernaut's like, I'm lonely, I just want to talk to you, and they're just like, you just killed us, so thanks for that. He's like, wow. I ruin everything, this is terrible. Number 2. What If the Traitor? In this alternate tale that comes to us from the 1989 volume of What If issue -1, we get to see what would happen if Trevor Fitzroy went back in time to try and convince Professor X to never create the X-Men. Although Bishop travels back in time to try and stop Fitzroy, it doesn't end up working out. Fitzroy shows the Professor of the future to come and all the war and prosecution that mutants will suffer. When Professor X meets Bishop, he inquires of Jean's fate and learns that she perishes, but that he and his X-Men remain a symbol of hope for the people. Unable to accept the dark future that awaits, however, Professor X seemingly agrees, despite Bishop's pleas, to never let the X-Men form, and Bishop ends up being locked up in prison in the past, with both Fitzroy and Bishop believing the other is the traitor. But who's really the traitor? Number 1. What if Spider-Man Back in Black? This story reimagines what would have happened had MJ ended up being shot by the Kingpin's hitman instead of Aunt May. Mary Jane as such does not end up in intensive care hanging to life by a thread, but instead dies pretty much instantly. This makes Peter lose control, going into a dark rage unlike any we've ever seen. He doesn't just plan on scaring and potentially finishing the Kingpin if MJ dies, because I mean she's already dead, but instead he plans on just straight up setting out to kill whoever was responsible for the hit, which he of course does find out was still Kingpin in this reality. Donning his black costume, he heads out planning to put an end to Kingpin once and for all, despite Aunt May and Iron Man trying to stop him and calm him down. In the end, Peter succeeds in killing Kingpin, Aunt May basically disowns him, and Iron Man has him arrested for murder, citing the Superhero Registration Act. Peter blames Iron Man for all this mess, by the way, demanding demanding a trial with a jury, and Iron Man denies any wrongdoing, claiming Peter made his choice. Number 10. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? What else would Spidey get up to? Well, in the long run, he basically ends up as a kind of television personality, an actor, and a producer. Spider-Man makes movies that he stars in as an action hero, but still keeps his identity a secret. In the end, he works toward promoting other vigilantes through films that he produces, and still ends up getting involved in crime fighting of sorts. A ton of villains in the form of the Sinister Six end up fighting against him. Well, really they end up fighting against Daredevil, and then Spider-Man's like, Daredevil, help me. But in the end, he's like, I gotta help because Daredevil's just one guy, and he doesn't really have superpowers in the same way that Spider-Man does. Included in this Sinister Six team-up is J. Jonah Jameson, who blames Spider-Man for the destruction of his life and his paper. In the end, Spider-Man realizes that he really mucked up by using his powers for gain instead of for good, which, fair. But he did have a really sweet cape, so there is that. Number 9. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? The story that started it all off. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four is a what if that in theory doesn't really sound too crazy until you realize what happens as a result. Spider-Man initially attempted to impress the FF by breaking into the Baxter building to show off his skills and strength. This happened way back when in the original comics. However, in the main continuity reality, they weren't too impressed by his antics and initially denied him entry to the team. In this version of the story, however, Sue Storm feels compelled to give Spidey a chance and help make it work so that he can pay his and Aunt May's bills while also acting as a hero within the team. However, she later becomes jealous when she is left behind on a mission and Spider-Man gets to go, which, I mean, fair enough. Sue's like, hello, I'm here too. In the end, this causes her to run into the arms of Namor, who she then joins, leaving Reed Richards, and with Spider-Man taking her place on the team. Sue is also transformed into an Atlantean by a device Namor created just for this purpose, in case I guess it one day happened that Sue wanted to join him and become an Atlantean, and she can no longer as a result breathe oxygen. I just love how this story ends. I feel like it's kind of random, but it's also kind of great. I just ship Sue and Namor so much, that's the problem here. I'm into it. I'm like, yes, Sue, be Namor's conscience. Rule the underwater kingdom. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it and more what if videos, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, we got a what if playlist, so go click the playlist wherever it is on the screen. I don't know, is it here? Is it somewhere? Click it. Number 8. What if Thanos joined the Avengers? Just even saying this title feels weird. This one comes to us from the one-shot What If Infinity Thanos. In this story, Thanos ends up joining and being accepted into the Avengers while they face off with the Builders. He and the team succeeded in defeating their enemy, but at great cost, losing Captain America along the way. In a shocking twist of events, even more shocking than Thanos becoming an Avenger in my opinion, he also ends up taking up Cap's shield after he dies in battle, and almost seems to mourn his loss? It's a weird one, but if you want to see Thanos rub shoulders with Thor and Captain Marvel, then this is definitely the story for you. Number 7. What if you were Spider-Man? This is one of those very short stories that is summed up within basically a page, or in this case, 2 pages. 2 panels. Here, the what if question posed is, what if you, yourself, were Spider-Man? I mean, if I were Spider-Man, I would probably carry my partner a little more securely while swinging around town, and I'd try to be a little kinder to myself when it came to all the self-guilt and blame that we usually see Spider-Man feeling over all of his failings. I'd definitely be doing weekly therapy sessions if I were Spider-Man. But don't think too hard about what you do differently or the same as Peter Parker, because the end to this what if is pretty hilarious and dark all at once. Because you are then greeted with a panel featuring a tombstone that says, "Here lies Spider-Man," where there is also a little space for you to fill in your name, and a bunch of villains surrounding it. Because of course, none of us average Joes could make it as Spidey. Har har. But also, it's probably true. I don't think I could actually make it as Spidey. Although we would have powers, right? I guess if we didn't have powers, we'd really be screwed though. Number 6. What if Helen Taylor had become Nova? This story takes place in the pages of issue 15 from Marvel's first What If volume, beginning in 1977. Here we get a few stories involving alternate characters taking up the mantle of Nova. One such character is a woman named Helen Taylor, who is basically a random civilian, redhead, and a wife. Or should I say a widow? She gets the power of Nova just after her husband is murdered in the streets in front of her after a mugging gone wrong. Helen swears to use her newfound power to get revenge, believing believing the powers are kind of an answer to her plea for some way to extract vengeance on the murderer, who we know as Willie DeBrow, or Willie DeBro, depending on how you want to say that. Nova sets off shaking down every criminal joint she can find in the city and making quick work of the Kingpin along her way to boot. The Fantastic Four manage to stop her and capture her to find out exactly what her powers are and where they came from and sort of why she's doing all this. And while this is going on, we learn that months ago, Willie perished in a car accident and has been dead ever since. What a twist. And if you're like, months ago, does that make sense? Yes, this story takes place over the course of months. I actually went back to look for that because I was like, that's so crazy, it's such a long period of time. A long period of time and only a few pages.
Number 5. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? Sure, being the crime-fighting webhead doesn't sound easy to other folks, but what if Peter himself had decided to go an entirely different route with these new given powers? Written by Peter B. Gillis, we see Peter if he decided to take out his uncle's killer in that moment. But what if Spidey did it just for the fame? Go get the TV news, people, he says. And since then, Peter is the big dog in town. He even refers to Flash as a nobody. He calls him a nobody to his face. And then he goes on the Johnny Carson show to be the cool cat, where it's revealed John Jameson, American astronaut, has died upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, and JJ is heartbroken that the real heroes in this world have to die, instead of these costume clowns just looking for fame. So Peter realizes what matters most by the end of the story, but what if this happened in the MCU? Maybe he would be outed by Stark, and then maybe he'd join Mysterio to make this whole villain production company. I don't know, I could see evil Spider-Man. Everybody loves him, so I mean, we kind of should throw a little bit of darkness in there. Number 4, what if the Hulk had become a barbarian? Written by Peter B. Gillis, in a world where Jarella had not died, the pair had returned to Kai. They were greeted with open arms, and the first order of business was to tie the knot. So he found peace on this planet in the form of defeating the Dark Gods, which is always a nice way to find peace within yourself. We saw a glimpse of this in Thor Ragnarok, where Hulk had crashed into Sakaar and was ruling as a gladiator, taking out dudes named Doug. It would be great if Disney Plus gave us a what if similar to these lines, where Banner had not been rescued and he'd kept slaying the biggest, baddest warriors in the galaxy. Would he be happy? Like, would he be fine with that? Would he cause more problems down the road for the Avengers? Or would he take care of a few Marvel baddies before they even got to Earth? I would love to see this play out in live action. Number 3, what if the Hulk had the brain of Bruce Banner? Written by Roy Thomas, we find Bruce Banner stuck in the path of the exploding gamma bomb, except this time he's got the same Bruce brain afterwards. So this causes massive changes. For one, he marries Betty Ross and they have a happy life. Score. He ends up curing Ben Grimm of his super dilemma, and he even recruits Professor X. So what if this happened in the MCU? I mean, I know we already have Smart Hulk at this point, so we're basically going to see some sort of version of this side of Bruce and his life. But in this what if comic, we see the arrival of Galactus. So Professor X and Smart Hulk and normal looking Ben Grimm combine their powers together to make this large X-Man, literally called it X-Man. That would be a great time to see what Smart Hulk could have been capable of during the run of the MCU. I mean, for one, the whole Sokovia incident would have been a lot different. Number 2, what if Wolverine killed the Hulk? With the MCU inches away from being introduced to mutants, being WandaVision with the introduction of her new twins, or maybe Wolverine crosses over to the multiverse and tries to take out the Hulk. Either one, I'm pretty excited for. Written by Rich Margopoulos, what if Wolverine killed the Hulk imagines a time where Logan ended up winning that big battle. The big question is, what or who did this, starting with a broken-hearted Betty Ross. So Logan is up to no good after this point. He eventually winds up joining the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. So Magneto tells Logan to join the X-Men undercover boss, Betrayal Edition, right? He's gonna go in and be secret, kind of like a sleeper agent. So while he spent his time alongside these mutants, he realized that these guys treat everybody like family, and he's kind of into it. So much so that he tells Magneto to get bent. Deal's off, bub. Sorry. So Magneto and him battle it out, both killing each other in the process. So while there's no sign of the X-Men in the MCU yet, this would be a pretty wild way to introduce them. Maybe some multiverse crossover villainness. And then Wanda could just fix it at their end, because, you know, Marvel likes doing that. And finally, number 1, what if Doctor Strange was a disciple of Dormammu? Written again, of course, by Peter Gillis, we see the Sorcerer Supreme join the dark side. Now, his origin story begins the same. He's a fancy doctor who gets in a car accident, and then from that day forward, he relies on his magic to do the heavy lifting. Well, any lifting, really. So he seeks the help of Mordo in order to heal his hands, and Dormammu insists to just give Strange what he wants. So, okay, sure, he heals Strange's hands, and then he returns to work better than ever. He's sharp, his hands are working fine. But the black magic is starting to kick in now, with Dormammu choosing Strange and Mordo as his high priests. and the future rulers of the cosmos as well. So not only do I think there's going to be a What If episode on Disney Plus about Strange being evil in some sort of way, because they kind of teased it, but the Sam Raimi sequel Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness should have some sort of variation to this one-shot comic. So fingers crossed we see it in What If or his movie. It's a win-win. Either way, I'm fine with it.
Number 10. What if Daredevil killed the Kingpin? That's exactly what happened in issue number 2 of the 1989 series. Following the events of Born Again in this alternate reality, Matt Murdock loses his mind, driven insane as a result of being tormented by Wilson Fisk, which honestly makes sense to me. I know I would be driven insane if all of that stuff happened to me. This causes Matt to take the fight directly to Kingpin, who he simply takes out by shooting him. After this detail is exposed, everyone is basically on his trail, including Punisher and Spider-Man. When Matt goes to beg for Richard Fisk, Wilson's son's, forgiveness, even Hobgoblin gets involved in this fray. While Matt ultimately dies in the fight protecting Richard from Hobgoblin, Richard, in an unexpected twist, ends up carrying on the Daredevil legacy. Which I guess shouldn't be too unexpected if you know about, 2099, where it's kind of what happens in 2099. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why don't you show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9. What if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? Now, you'd think this would actually be one of the happier what if stories, considering when Spider-Man started out, this was actually like one of his dreams to join the FF team, but he was denied it. However, in this universe, they do decide to allow Spider-Man to join them, making his dreams come true, but it actually ends up worse than if they just refused him like they did in the main continuity. I also think that this first issue of What If is pretty important, as it really sets the tone for what these hypothetical comic stories could be, a look into a much darker reality where not everything goes according to plan. But we don't have to really deal with the consequences long term because, these stories are like windows into other more distant worlds, so they don't affect our main world. We can kind of just see like, I wonder what that world would be like. Terrible? Yep. In issue number 1 of the first volume of What If, Spider-Man ends up joining the Fantastic Four team, which I believe they renamed themselves to the Fantastic Five. Still has a pretty good ring to it actually. When Susan Storm actually makes the suggestion that, maybe letting him join wouldn't be such a bad idea, so Sue is actually the one that kind of gets him on the team ultimately here. But in the end, this results in her feeling often left out, shunted from this team as a result of Spider-Man's impressive presence. He just completely outdoes Sue, so she feels pretty left out. This causes her in the end to choose to remain with Namor, ultimately leaving the Fantastic Five team, something for which Spider-Man blames himself and which leaves a massive hole in the team and a massive hole in Reed's heart. Number 8. What if Spider-Man became a murderer? This is maybe the brightest of the darkest what if stories that I have on this list, but it's still really dark, so hence why it's here, especially at the start here. In issue number 72 of the 1989 What If series, we answer the question, what if Spider-Man became a murderer? Dun dun dun! With him confronting the burglar who killed his Uncle Ben and losing control of his emotions, killing said burglar in turn. This, however, eats Peter up inside, and it isn't until Dr. Kurt Connors becomes the Lizard and decides to fess up to his own actions that Peter is actually inspired and is able to confess to the murder that he was responsible for and reveal that he is the one that's Spider-Man. He does some time, but thanks to him showing remorse, he only gets 5 years, and Aunt May is still waiting for him when he gets out with his costume. It's dark, but it's also kind of cute in the end, because I think one of his biggest concerns was that Aunt May would never love him again, and she is upset, but she eventually gets over it, and she's like, well, this is still my nephew, so kinda nice. Still terrible, but kinda nice. Number 7. What if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? This one actually comes to us from a comic titled What If?, starring Daredevil, the man without fear. But the question posed in the intro is, what if Daredevil's dad had thrown the big fight? Which is that's why I named the point that. It might not seem as dark as some other tales in the what if category, but the intro literally also poses the question in this issue. What if we shed a little light on the dark side of the Marvel Universe? And the story definitely delivers there, I would say. Here, Matt's dad takes the dive for his son and earns the money needed to send him to law school. Sounds pretty good. There, Matt meets Elektra. Also sounds pretty good. The two have a love affair that ends when her father is killed and they're both unable to save him together. Okay, it's starting to turn kinda dark. She leaves and Matt is then forced to deal with his own family tragedy as his father ends up in the hospital after a hit in a fight leaves him comatose. Okay, it's getting darker. Unable to afford the bills, he drops out of school and himself becomes a fighter, but when he is asked to take a dive for a paycheck, he refuses. As punishment, his father is killed, and Elektra returns to encourage Matt to seek retribution. This is where it gets pretty dark, I would say. Matt basically goes after Wilson Fisk with his intention to do it his own way. Now, he doesn't want to kill him, but he just wants to expose him for his illegal business dealings, which is a very Matt Murdock approach, I would say. In the end, though, Elektra kills Fisk for Matt basically during this confrontation, and Matt chooses to incriminate himself in the murder because he feels guilty about Kingpin's death. Yikes. Number 6. What if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by a radioactive spider? This What If comic, issue number 7 from the original series from the 70s, actually has 3 stories in it. In one of them, Flash Thompson tries on the role of superhero, as he ends up becoming the one fatefully bitten by the radioactive spider that day in the science lab on the student field trip. And if you're wondering, well, Amanda, you know, Flash Thompson actually has been a hero. I know he's been a hero in the main continuity, but I mean, in this reality, he's trying on the superhero role of Spider-Man. He becomes Spider-Man and does his best to be a great hero, but actually dies during his attempt to be one. Sad. He fights the Vulture, and it's during a battle in the sky where the Vulture successfully manages to kick Flash off of him that Flash's Spider-Man falls to the ground. Unable to find much in the way of cushion or slowing his descent, the fall does him in, and Peter Parker finds Spider-Man in the alleyway, unmasking him to recognize the face of Flash Thompson, the ire of his high school experience. Now acknowledging the fact that Flash was Spider-Man though, Peter seems to forget all about this as he actually mourns the loss of Thompson, which makes it even more sad. Number 5. What if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? While all of these stories are based on things that actually did happen, this is also based on something that did happen, so if you think it sounds weird because it's just so random, that is a thing that actually happened, where Iron Man and Doctor Doom in main continuity traveled back to the time of Arthurian legend. However, rather than getting back home in this version while Doom manages to leave, he leaves Iron Man trapped in the past. Oh no! A weird turn of events ends up leaving Tony Stark as the ruler and king of England following the death of his friend King Arthur. Tony actually proves to be a great king and lives out his days there in the past just as an accomplished and celebrated ruler. I actually wonder what effect that would have had on the present, because I feel like everything would be very different if Tony Stark were the king of England. This all goes down in issue 33 of the 1997 What If series, so you can check that out if you want. Number 4. What if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? One of them is just being a giant brain. It's true. Actually, overall, these powers feel very Doom Patrol meets X-Men in my opinion. In this alternate story, when subjected to cosmic radiation, the FF get completely different powers than what each member has in main continuity. Johnny becomes a robot, Ben gets dragon-like wings, Reed is just a disembodied brain, admittedly not a very great power, and Sue ends up with the least original powers, getting Reed's old powers instead, the ability to stretch her body like Taffy or Silly Putty. Really, I feel like Sue always gets sort of like the worst part of these stories whenever she's in a What If. Hers are always so like quick or just so kinda lame, and I'm like, dang, why doesn't Invisible Woman get some cool stuff? I think she was still Invisible Girl at this time though, maybe that's why. Number 3. What if Aunt May instead of her nephew Peter had been bitten by that radioactive spider? This story reimagines what would have happened if once again it was not Peter Parker who received the fateful radioactive spider bite, but instead was his elderly Aunt May. This is from a humor issue, so you know it's gonna be weird and you know it's gonna be great. And it is. Aunt May here ends up getting bit after realizing that Peter had left his lunch at home on the day he and his class were meant to visit the exhibit at the Science Institute. And if you're like, Amanda, it's not called the Science Institute. Seriously, if you go to this issue, that is what is written on the building in the Science Institute. Of what? We don't know. She successfully delivers the forgotten lunch to Peter, cottage cheese and mashed string beans, but ends up feeling unwell on her way home, and finds that she has developed superpowers. She makes her own costume, becoming Spider-Man, and ends up facing off in this story with the ridiculous villain, Leapfrog. Because that's just how it goes. Number 2. What if the Fantastic Four all had the stretching powers of Mr. Fantastic? Oh boy, I love this issue because we get 4 stories where we get to imagine what it would be like if multiple members of the FF shared basically the same powers. And in the one where they all get stretching powers, they just never end up becoming the Fantastic Four because their collective power is just considered well, kinda lame. Sue in fact insists that they never let anyone know of their powers because she feels like, and I quote, a freak. Both Sue and Ben feel as though the stretching powers are ridiculous, monstrous, ugly, and dumb, while Reed and Johnny actually think they're pretty neat and even could be useful. Still, Sue and Ben's way of thinking wins out, so the Fantastic Four never become a superhero team. The end. Number 1. What if Thanos had changed Galactus into a human being? I really love this What If story personally. It comes to us from, once again, one of the humor issues of What If, so you know it's gonna be a riot. In this story, Thanos turns Galactus into a human being in order to defeat him, and Galactus ends up on Earth with no memory of who he was or is. He does, however, happen to look a lot like Elvis Presley, and even sings and plays like him too. He meets a woman named Gertrude who introduces him to the works of Presley, and Galactus is basically convinced that he must indeed be like an amnesiac version of Elvis Presley returned from the dead. He goes on to have a successful music career, and when his memories are later restored by Adam Warlock, who also offers to return his power to him, he actually decides instead to stay on Earth and live out his life here as Elvis with Gertrude and her son Toby, which, I mean, fair enough. That sounds like a pretty good life. Number 10. What if the X-Men had lost Inferno? This very chaotic and fire-filled demon horde-infested story comes to us from What If Volume 2, issue number 6. And we are starting it off hot, friends. This is quite a dark story. Here we get to imagine what the fate of the world would have been like had the X-Men failed in defeating Madeline Pryor during the events of Inferno. Instead, she and Sim take over the planet Earth, unleashing hordes of demons on it and ruling it together. However, the heroes who have survived their reign of terror manage to band together and, using their power, fight back. In the end, they do win the day, but not without casualties. Wolverine himself in the story ends up becoming the pet of the Goblin Queen, and Sim fully giving into his feral rage and feeding on the innocent. Ugh. He only becomes free from the fog of his rage after he kills Kitty Pryde tragically and realizes the monster that he has become. Number 9. What if Captain America were revived today? 1983. Because there's another one of these from like, I think 1994, so yeah, but that's in volume 2. We're going to volume 1. There are actually a few different stories involving Captain America being revived in the modern day or simply evolving with time as it passed. So 1994, and I think there's also another one of them which might even be on this list. But in this What If from volume 1, issue 44, we get a darker take on what a modern day Cap could look like in the 80s. This version of the hero ends up turning America into a heavily monitored and policed country during his witch hunt for communists. Fortunately, as dark as that all is, we learn that this isn't the real Captain America but an imposter that took his place after he went MIA. The real Cap returns and battles it out with imposter Cap, but in the end, the real Captain America turns to the people of America to undo all the damage done. He asks them to take responsibility, as while they were led to this point by a false version of him, they also allowed themselves to be led falsely. It's honestly a really good speech that even today rings true in a lot of ways, at least for me, and it provides the silver lining and shining hope for an otherwise pretty dark tale. Little grains of hope, that's all we need. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, if you want more What If lists, be sure to let us know by giving this a thumbs up, sharing it, doing all the things. Also, if you want more What If content, we do have a playlist now for that. Yay! Number 8. What if Wolverine killed the Hulk? In issue 31 of the 1977 What If series, we find out what would happen if instead, when Wolverine first met the Hulk, he had killed him. Wolverine goes on to celebrate his victory against the big green Goliath after killing him, having some drinks and throwing some punches like he usually does at the local tavern. However, in the end, things get out of hand and he accidentally kills one of the patrons in a rage. When he seeks help from the military to protect and defend him, they actually turn their back on Wolverine, and so he ends up joining the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. He becomes a sleeper agent for Magneto, infiltrating the X-Men. However, when Magneto finally plans on enacting his plan to defeat and capture the X-Men, Wolverine has a change of heart, feeling as though he has truly found acceptance and a family with the mutant team of heroes. He battles Magneto one-on-one, and the two kill one another in the end. It's a pretty tragic tale. Basically, all what ifs with Wolverine I feel like are usually pretty sad. Pretty sad or pretty dark. Number 7. What if Captain America had not vanished during World War II? See, another Captain America story because I love these. This story comes to us from issue 5 of volume 1, aka the 1977 What If series. While Captain America does not get trapped in the ice and Bucky never goes missing, presumed dead, only to become brainwashed and repurposed by the Soviet Union as the Winter Soldier, a worse fate seemingly awaits both of these heroes. Neither having ever disappeared, Steve goes on to fight as Captain America until he eventually retires from the mantle, becoming instead the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Bucky ends up taking his place, becoming the new Cap, as we have also seen happen in modern comics, and Rick Jones ends up becoming Buck's new sidekick, also going by the mantle of Bucky. Because I guess Rick or Ricky just doesn't have the same zing to it? Sadly though, Cap Bucky ends up dying on a mission, and Sharon Carter, Agent 13, who had hoped to settle down with Bucky after his final mission, blames Steve for his death. She actually accuses him of robbing him of his childhood and putting him in danger. Pretty intense. And then of course it ends with Rick volunteering to become the new Cap, so the deadly cycle it seems is destined to still continue in this timeline. You'd feel like after that all happened, Steve might be like, maybe we won't do that again, it didn't go great the last time. But he's just like, ah yes, Rick Jones, now you will be Captain America and probably die. What if the Green Goblin stole the Infinity Gauntlet? This story comes to us from the What If Infinity Dark Reign one-shot. Here we see Green Goblin dealing with a lot of family drama and trauma from his past. He steals the Infinity Gauntlet and not only uses it to defeat, well, all the heroes of planet Earth and beyond, but it's also revealed that his true motivation for doing all of this and pretty much everything that he's done is to win his father's approval. His father, who was always so unimpressed and who for a long time mistreated him, pushing Norman towards greatness or else. When Norman showcases his villainous accomplishments, it only causes his father to revile him even more though. Norman then decides to use his Infinity Gauntlet to snap and influence his father, making him proud of him instead. But this makes his father's love and approval feel pretty empty, especially when Norman learns that his altered dad actually really only loves him just because he's his son, and not for all that he has accomplished. Which you would think would be really nice, but to Norman he's like, that's infuriating, I hate that. Norman erases his father from existence, and in so doing, erases himself. Don't you hate when that happens?
Number 5. What if the alien costume had possessed Spider-Man? What if Volume 2, Issue 4? We see a darker turn of events with Peter in that new black alien suit. Now we see a world where the sonic blast didn't break the two of them apart, they just stayed together and then trouble happens. The symbiote claims that Spider-Man and him are now one, and Reed Richards couldn't detect the symbiote for days because spider sense and the symbiote's camouflage powers, he was like, eh, good luck, zoom, disappeared. Now the symbiote ends up ripping through the Avengers, and due to the fact that Peter was stuck with the symbiote problem, he couldn't save S.H.I.E.L.D. agents like he normally would. They ended up biting the bullet because of this, and then Peter ended up losing 50 years of his life trying to deal with this. He ended up dying of old age just on the ground. It's dark, but it's a really good what if. Number 4. What if Spider-Man had a Spider-Girl? What if Volume 2, Issue 105, Mayday Parker has another chance of life rather than, you know, be written out. Now this takes place years after her father Peter retired. Now Mayday Parker began getting powers of her own when she was around 15 years old, and when Norman Osborn stepped up as the new Green Goblin, she stepped up as the new Webhead. She found an old outfit that belonged to Ben Reilly and became Spider-Girl. Now the issue did so well that Marvel launched its own universe to continue these stories. Now it's called the MC2 universe. Number 3. What if Kraven the Hunter had killed Spider-Man? Ooh, it's dark. Written by Richard Howell. Volume 2, Issue 17. Now this one is dark, obviously by the title you know what's gonna happen, but it's really compelling. What if Kraven had killed Spider-Man? Okay, so we start with Pete in the streets, he's patrolling the city when he's suddenly trapped by Kraven, and just like that, he unloads a beating. He kills Peter, and then to celebrate, he eats a bunch of spiders, and then suits up in his clothes. Like, what a weirdo. What a monster. So now he's Spider-Man. He's the captain now. Okay, cool. Now what's step 2, you freak? At the same time, MJ is approached by a couple of thugs on the street, and then in comes Spider-Man to save her. Now MJ can tell something's up because Spider-Man doesn't even recognize her, first of all, and the way that he's fighting these guys is just brutal, like it's not for the faint of heart. So Captain America, Daredevil, and Human Torch jump in to see what is going on with the wall crawler. Now they did a decent job wearing down the beast, but still they needed more power. So he ate a bunch of spiders earlier, so now it's only fair if he tries to eat Spider-Man's dead body, right? I guess. So MJ tells Cap and the gang that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker. This Spider-Man is indeed not the same. So that's one scenario that happens. Spider-Man's identity's out, which sucks. And then Aunt May goes into denial hearing that news, and now she's messed up for life. And the media isn't happy with the tension between supers and the public either at this point. So the story ends up with MJ standing at Peter's funeral, wondering how things could have been. God, Peter can't catch a break in any of these universes. Number 2, what if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? One of my favorite what ifs. This is so amazing. Okay, what if issue 19, written by Peter Gillis? We see a life for Peter if he decided to take out his uncle's killer in that moment instead of, letting him get away and then the rest of his life happening the way it did. So what if Spidey was Spider-Man but just for the fame? What if he just wanted to be a famous dude? Go get the TV news people, he says. Also, TV news people, that's a funny way to put it. Now he's the big dog in town. He just wants to brag about how he takes down these criminals. He even refers to Flash as a nobody, which I mean, words hurt, Peter. Like you don't call somebody a nobody. That's pretty rude. And then he goes on the Johnny Carson show to be the cool cat in town, where it's revealed on the show that John Jameson, American astronaut, had died upon re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. And then JJ is heartbroken that the real heroes have to die instead of these costume clowns just kicking their feet back, talking shit on talk shows, So Peter realizes what matters most by the end of the story, thankfully. But having Flash call a nobody, it's honestly worth the read for all the bad stuff that happens. Number 1, what if someone else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Okay, this one is jam-packed. We have 3 different scenarios to enjoy, and this is one that I definitely left this one for number 1 for a reason. It's so good. I mean, first of all, like I said earlier, who wouldn't want to be Spider-Man? You probably imagined it to yourself when I said it. What would you do if you were Spider-Man? Would you go for the fame? Would you kind of lay low? Would you take out criminals in like a cool way? Would you tell your family? Would you make a Twitter? Would you I am Iron Man it and just tell everybody? Well, in What If Volume 1, Issue 7, back in the late 70s, we see Flash Thompson, Betty Brant, and John Jameson all get their shot at being the web slinger, and it's way harder than I thought it was going to be. So Flash gets bit and he teaches a bad driver a lesson, and he's maybe a little bit too harsh, not gonna lie. And then he decides, oh, you know what, I'm pretty good at fighting people, I'm gonna take a crack at professional wrestling. But due to his super strength, he accidentally kills a guy doing this. The Vulture has an easy time taking him on as well, so it's not really the best in any scenario. And then Betty Brant is now up next. Now her costume is pretty sweet. It makes for great photo shoots, apparently. But while she was making TikToks, she ran out of web fluid, and when a thief ran by and got away, she had no web stuff. She couldn't do anything. She was like, I used my powers. I'm out for the day. See ya. And that thief was the one who took Uncle Ben's life. And then next up is JJ's son, John Jameson. While his outfit was pretty on point, his judgment was not. He wasn't good at the superhero life, and he died trying to stop a space shuttle from crashing. So we like ending on fun notes here at Top 10 Nerd.
Number 10. What if Loki had found the hammer of Thor? Okay, so back in 2011, we got to see Chris Hemsworth rise as the god of thunder. He was reunited with Mjolnir and saves the lives of many since. Him and his hammer are pretty kick-ass combo, you gotta love it. But with the amount of times Mjolnir has been lifted in the MCU by others, one has to wonder who's next in line to pick up the mighty mallet. Well, we know Jane Foster will be in line next with the announcement of the new Thor sequel being based off the mighty Thor storyline. That and Natalie Portman sort of walked out holding a hammer, so cat's out of the bag there. Well, in 1977's What If Loki Had Found the Hammer of Thor, written by Peter B. Gillis, now I feel like Disney is kind of doing this with Loki's own show. I mean, bending reality, exploring numerous timelines where his mischievous deeds came out on top. So they clearly want to do more with the character after his apparent death in Infinity War. Let's just hope finding Thor's hammer is one of those ideas that we get to see play out. Because the more Tom Hiddleston, the better. Right? I don't know. And before we go on to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and click thumbs up because it helps us out a lot here at our channel. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for sticking with us. Now back to some more crazy what if comics. Number 9. What if Captain America had been elected president? By Mark W. Barr. Avengers Endgame showed us an older Captain America, which was a really sweet moment for fans because we got the best of both worlds. Cap destroyed Thanos in a fight and then he lived out his days with Peggy. Boom. But what if he didn't decide to go back in time? What if he instead got asked to be the NPP candidate for president? Well, he'd start by thinking about it, but not too seriously. That is until the next page where he very quickly changes his mind. So the announcement sparks a lot of excitement in the Avengers. I mean, Spider-Man starts to walk a little bit taller when he hears that he's Cap's first choice for vice president. But of course, not everybody is on board with this idea, and an assassination attempt is of course made. But don't worry, Mr. President can handle it himself, being Captain America and all. We see the return of Red Skull in this story as well, and in typical Steve Rogers fashion, lays his life down to save the world. Marvel isn't afraid of bringing back past villains. I mean, Red Skull is a huge part of both Infinity War and Endgame, so to see an alternate timeline where Cap becomes president doesn't sound too far off to what we might see in these what-if stories. Number 8. What if Captain America was revived today? Okay, so while running for president might sound pretty badass, we of course have to look into what if Captain America was revived today, written again by Peter B. Gillis. So we see Cap and Bucky being thawed out and put back into the real world, only it's much, much later. But it doesn't take long for them to suit up and get ready for the fight. They woke up and decided they were going to kick ass together. And they find their replacement quite well in the new world, being invited to do interviews on talk shows, all that fun stuff. But with great power comes a great target on your back, and Cap once again finds himself greeted by a bullet. And that's just the start, honestly, because once he comes back again, he has to fight himself. It's a whole ordeal. I mean, sure, we've seen two Captain Americas square off against each other, but hopefully we can see more of a political side to that scenario. After all, I'm sure 2023 Cap has some different ideas than 1940s Cap. Number 7. What if Thanos joined the Avengers? Now that the MCU has wrapped up the Infinity Saga, one can only hope we don't run into the Mad Titan again. But with Josh Brolin confirmed as part of the cast for Marvel's What If, we have to speculate what his role could be. Well, for starters, what about a new Avenger? That's right, written by Joshua Williamson, What If Thanos Joined the Avengers starts off with Thor and the Mad Titan putting in some work together. Yeah, we have Thanos working with the team to prevent a war with the Builders. So the Avengers trust Thanos to pull his weight for the time being, but not old wise Captain America. No, not that easy. See, Thor reminds him that his paranoia will be the reason that his mind is clouded during the battle, and then that will be the reason that they end up failing. Thanos just wants to get his son Thane back. Where's my son? And I gotta say, seeing Thanos pick up the shields, I mean, that would be just as satisfying as seeing Cap pick up the hammer. I mean, a little bit darker, maybe not as, hopeful, but still pretty badass nonetheless. Let's just hope there's a greater threat out there worth Thanos switching sides for. Number 6. What if somebody else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Written by Don Glut. Guys, we've all dreamt of having superpowers. I mean, especially if you're on this channel, you've thought about it probably more than a handful of times. I mean, the amount of times that I wish I was Spider-Man when I was stuck in traffic or in the middle of like a busy full movie theater, I just want to web away. It's gotta be so much easier. So in this what if, we see that kind of play out. We see Flash Thompson, Betty Brant, and John Jameson get their time with the radioactive spider. And let's just say Peter is still the best case scenario. It's a lot harder than it looks. So Flash gets bit and then teaches a bad driver a lesson. So he decides to take a crack at professional wrestling. Keep going with this whole super thing. And then he accidentally kills the guy. Plus the Vulture takes him on, no problem at all. Then Betty Brant is up to bat. And her Spider-Girl costume is pretty awesome. I mean, it makes for great photo shoots, that's for sure. But when she runs out of web fluid for the gram, the thief runs by and gets away, no problem. That thief being the one that took Uncle Ben's life. See, everything happens for a reason, it seems. So next up is JJ's son, John Jameson. While his outfit was pretty on point, his judgment was quite dull. And he died trying to stop a space shuttle from crashing. So which character would you want to see having a swing at the spider life? Let us know in the comments down below. I think Hulk. I think the Incredible Hulk would be the best with spider webs. He'd be unstoppable, I think, yeah.
Number 5. What if Ben Parker's nephew was Galactus? I love this story. This is a humorous what if story included in issue 3 of volume 2 of the What If series. In this story, we find out what would have happened if Uncle Ben's nephew was Galactus instead of Peter. Galactus arrives home to find out that his Uncle Ben has been murdered, but he refuses to accept this, mourning the death of his uncle, who gave him his very first microscope. Oh no. With a mere thought, he vaporizes his uncle's murderer, reducing him to protoplasmic slime. Then he uses the power cosmic to restore his uncle to full health, even giving him powers and turning him into a Silver Surfer version of himself. Silver Uncle Ben? The story has a happy ending, with Aunt May satiating her nephew's hunger with a very hefty helping of wheat cakes. Oh, it's so great. It's so wholesome. Number 4. What if Wolverine had lived during the age of Conan the Barbarian? Or more specifically, what if Wolverine had fallen through a portal and ended up in the age of Conan the Barbarian and then lived on there? Yeah. This is what happens here, and of course, because this is what this story was always meant to be about, Wolverine and Conan end up going head to head, because we all know this is really a what if Wolverine and Conan fought each other story. In the end, Wolverine falls for Red Sonja because redheads, and Conan also ends up falling for Jean because redheads, after he falls back through a portal that sends him to Wolverine's time by accident. All in all, Conan ends up getting pretty messed up here, losing his hand, and then when he does return to Wolverine's time, without Logan's presence, Jean ends up going full powerful Dark Phoenix and basically destroys the universe. Meanwhile, it's a happy ending for Wolverine, who stays in Conan's age and ends up with Red Sonja. What a strange but fantastic adventure. You can check this one out in issue 16 of the second What If volume starting in 1989. Number 3. What if Spider-Man married Black Widow? This one is another one-panel story brought to us in Volume 1's jam-packed humor issue, issue 34. Here we see a one-panel story that answers the question, what if Black Widow and Spider-Man ended up getting married? This is also just a strange question to pose, as these two, well, they don't have a ton of interaction in the comics, and they've never really been known to have any kind of long-lasting romance that could potentially lead to wedding bells. However, there could be a reason for that, it turns out. The what if uses a bit of wordplay for this scenario, implying that because Natasha is a Black Widow, she would end up eating Spider-Man. After all, that is what Black Widows try to do, in nature that is. I don't know if Black Widow could actually catch Spider-Man in the comics. I feel like he might be a little too fast, and he's also got a spidey sense, but whatever, it's just a fun what if story, so taking it way too seriously. Number 2. What if the original Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? In this what if, we get to imagine what it would be like if the original Marvel bullpen had become the FF in real life, each being given their own superpowers matching the actual Fantastic Four team. Stan Lee as such becomes Mr. Fantastic, Flo Steinberg becomes Invisible Woman, or Invisible Girl as she was still known then, Sol Brodsky becomes the Human Torch, and Jack Kirby becomes the ever-loving Thing. The story is crazy over the top, and it doesn't seem to paint any of them in too kind of a light, to be honest, with the staff being transformed by a mysterious device delivered to the office sent courtesy of the S people. But who are the S people? They end up becoming even more famous than their comic book counterparts, the original Fantastic Four, and eventually ask Prince Namor for help. They don't get turned back into their normal selves, but they do uncover the mystery of who the S people are. Any guesses? S, it turns out, stands for Skrull. Surprise. I mean, I was kind of surprised by that, because I was like, what starts with an S? And for some reason, Skrull did not come to my mind. Not reading a lot of Skrull stuff lately, obviously. Number 1. What if you were the Red Skull? I get the idea of what if you were Spider-Man, but what if you were the Red Skull? I mean, out of all the villains to pick, that is certainly a weird one to include here, Marvel. I did not see that coming. This story is also featured in issue 34 of the 1989 volume of What If, right under Spider-Man. Now, I see what they were trying to do, give you the option of a what if you were a hero or what if you were a villain, because, you know, that seems kind of fair. But I mean, given Red Skull's history, it just seems like a weird one to include, when you could have picked, I don't know, a bunch of any other villains that exist that people might want to be more. Like, what about Doctor Doom or Green Goblin, which would make sense with Spidey, or even sometimes villain, sometimes hero, all-time thief, Black Cat. I mean, I would want to be Black Cat. Wouldn't you want to be Black Cat? She's so cool. Number 10. What if Jane Foster had found the Hammer of Thor? This one isn't so strange for the premise, but it's more bizarre because of where the premise took us in the end. This is a story we've also seen adapted to the main continuity, though fortunately it does not quite share this same ending, which I'm pretty happy about, to be honest. Jane ends up finding the Hammer of Thor and becoming the goddess of storms, taking up the mantle Thordis. Lady Sif, missing Thor, ends up finding and falling in love with Donald Blake, who is later revealed, of course, to be the true Thor when Odin asks Thordis to return his hammer to him. As thanks for her service, however, Odin makes Jane a goddess. However, as Jane was in love with Donald, who is now Thor and is in love with Lady Sif, her heart is broken, and she has to be returned to her mortal self because of this. But Odin has a better solution and proposes to Jane, who agrees, to marry him, and then they all live happily ever after. With Jane finding that those very qualities she both admired and loved in the mortal Don Blake are also to be found in the father of immortal Thor. My goodness. That's a very strange ending to that story. How about instead of being with my son, you be with me, his father, haha. Okay, Odin, what? I feel like I like it better when Odin just doesn't really like Jane. I think that works more. Is that weird? Number 9. What if the Avengers were the last superheroes on Earth? This story allows us to imagine what the world would be like if all the superpowered beings on Earth were defeated by the Avengers. At the behest of the Scarlet Centurion, the Avengers attempt to eradicate all superpowered beings, including themselves. In the end, after all threats have been defeated, they decide to disband, being the last ones with powers, in order to usher in an era of peace on Earth. They all go off to live their own normal-ish lives. Thor returns to Asgard, regard, Tony returns to being a billionaire playboy in Las Vegas, only to realize that it doesn't really bring him any joy and actually considers entering into politics. And Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym actually seem to find quite a bit of happiness, going off and getting married and focusing on their time with one another, which is kind of sweet. I guess if they weren't superheroes, it would work out pretty well for them. Scarlet Centurion does return to threaten Earth and forces the Avengers to come together one more time, but after defeating him, they once again go their separate ways back into retirement. And they also kind of question, like, if being a superhero is actually a bad thing, because does it create more problems than it solves? Just a quick reminder, if you love these what if lists, I personally love bringing them to you because these stories are amazing. Be sure to show us that love by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing, commenting, subscribing, all the things. Number 8. What if the Gamma Bomb spawned 1,000 Hulks? This story comes to us from volume 2 of the What If series that started back in 1989. In issue 71, we get to imagine a reality where instead of just one Hulk, or the members of the Hulk family plus Hulk, we had 1,000 of them, which I would say is ultimately too many Hulks. In this story, it was the bombing on Hiroshima that resulted in these thousands of Hulks coming into existence, survivors of the attack that were basically mutated, so they became Hulks. In the end, Bruce Banner, aka Hulk, who of course goes on to become the Hulk in the story, must attempt to stand up against this army and attempt to defeat it with the help of some friends. Number 7. What if Betty Brant, instead of Spider-Man, had been bitten by the radioactive spider? This one comes to us from a 3-part story and is simply one story within that. It is from the original What If series volume 1 from 1997, issue number 7. Here, Betty Brant, instead of Peter Parker, is the one bitten by the radioactive spider, gaining spider-like abilities. While the story isn't a strange premise at all, like I don't think it's weird for Betty Brant to become, a version of Spider-Man, what really makes this one stand out for me in terms of its weirdness is Betty's costume here, which is it's something. It's also odd that in this alternate reality, Betty happens to be the only alternate person to become Spider-Man that manages to survive the ordeal, with both John Jameson and Flash Thompson in this issue, who are featured in the other 2 stories, dying as a result of gaining spider powers and attempting to use them. Instead of Betty choosing not to pursue the thief that kills Peter's Uncle Ben, she simply is unable to because she used up all her web fluid posing for pictures for Peter. Which is a whole other thing, but also, wait, can't you just go after them anyways? Don't you have superpowers? It doesn't matter that your web fluid is gone. Anyways, she still blames herself for Uncle Ben's death and decides to quit being Spider Lady, which I think is a little harsh. I feel like she wasn't really super responsible for that, but I guess she could have gone after him. I don't know why she didn't do that. Be like, use your super strength, climb on walls, do any of the other things you can do. Number 6. What if Submariner never regained his memories? This story allows us to glimpse into an alternate reality where Namor never met the Human Torch and never ended up regaining his memories and returning to Atlantis, learning that he was the true ruler of the underwater kingdom. Instead, the Submariner remains unaware of his true heritage and ends up joining a ship's crew, finding himself inexplicably drawn to the sea. I wonder why. The captain of the ship, Namor's friend McCandless, ends up being mutineered against and goes overboard while injured when he believes they found the lost entrance to the center of the earth. Namor, or Mr. Smith as he's known, follows after him and ends up being retrieved from the ice-cold water by Inuits later on. They end up worshipping Namor as the Lord of the Frozen Sea, along with Frozen Captain America, who they worship as the Lord of the Frozen Ice. And Namor's like, I guess this is my life now, and I'm pretty good with it. So I guess it all worked out in the end, and now he just gets to be the Lord of the Sea really far up north where it's cold. Cool, I guess?
Number 5. What if the Avengers had never been? Written by Jim Shooter and Gil Kane, released in 1977, this was actually the first What If issue with a major death, so of course it has to be on the list somewhere. So we start off with the Hulk. Now this time he's not hitting, he's actually quitting. Now this caused the Avengers to dismantle, so Stark asked Rick Jones to find the Hulk, Thor went back to Asgard, and Jan and Hank went back to living as normal people. So Rick finds him, but he's now being held hostage from the Green Giant. So Stark swoops in and saves him, and they head back to the Avengers mansion. So Namor and the Hulk call out the Avengers, or rather what's left of them. So Iron Man makes a few iron suits for the others, and the suits, I mean, they aren't Tony Stark. They can't control these things nearly as well as he can. Unless you're in the movie Iron Man 3, then everyone can
do that all of a sudden. So they stay in retirement. They're like, screw that, I don't want any part of that. So he's like, whatever. He powers up his own suit a little bit too much, and then he heads to the battle alone. He fights a bit, and then right when he's about to be ended, the rest show up. Jan, Hank, and Rick are back. Nice. So Tony is done at this point. His armor is weak, he's close to being finished off, so he uses his remaining power to regenerate Hank's armor. So the Hulk snaps out of it and goes after Namor, while the rest of our heroes mourn over a fallen Tony Stark, who sacrificed himself to save his team. Similar vibes to Endgame. A lot of feels in that one, okay? A lot of feels. A good number 5 feels train. Number 4, what if somebody else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Written by Don Glut, released in 1977, we get to see a dream play out. Look, we've all probably wanted to be Spider-Man at one point or another. Of course, I mean, doing backflips and swinging downtown, that's gotta be the vibe. But of course, when it comes to stopping criminals and taking out supervillains, it's probably pretty stressful. So in this what if, we get to see this idea play out. We see other characters have a crack at the life of the web slinger, starting with Flash Thompson. And let's just say it's a lot harder than it looks. So we got Flash Thompson. Now after he gets bit, he teaches a bad driver a lesson, and he feels pretty good with his new given abilities, and he plays it out a bit. So he decides to take a crack at professional wrestling, maybe make some cash, which is a pretty good idea. I mean, you're a superhero, so you can definitely win most, if not all, fights. But he accidentally kills the guy. Sorry, oops. Then Betty Brant is now up with the powers. Okay, so let's see how she would do in the life. Well, her costume for starters is pretty badass. But when she runs out of web fluid while making TikToks, a thief runs by and gets away. And that thief, of course, being the one to take Uncle Ben's life. So far, so bad. Now finally, we have our third contender with the powers. John Jameson. While his outfit was also pretty good, he couldn't do the job like Peter, and he actually died while trying to prevent a space shuttle from crashing. I guess it's not as easy as it looks. I mean, to be fair, if something actually happened and it had webs, I really wouldn't know what to do. I would do a backflip and be like, is it fixed? No? It was cool though. Number 3. What if the Punisher killed Daredevil? We all know the Punisher as the guy who usually brutally kills criminals. See, with superheroes, those guys he likes to hit with a tranquilizer. But in this what if, we see Daredevil get hit with one of those tranq darts and fall off a building. So while Kingpin prepared for his next step now that he's out of the way, Spider-Man stepped in to deliver some justice on Frank Castle. So he finds the Punisher, and Punisher has no tranq darts left. So he shoots Spider-Man in the shoulder. It's messy, but not fatal, he says. He should survive unless he exerts himself, which he does. And his identity is then revealed. Then it cuts to Aunt May's house, and she grabs a paper, reads the shocking headline, and then the house explodes from a missile launched from the Silvermane City. Boom, house gone. And then after a little while, Peter shows up in a hospital gown, ready to get some revenge on Frank. Peter does pretty well in the fight, so well he's actually just moments away from throwing the Punisher off of a building to his death. But the Punisher stalls and says he has info about his Aunt May, and this slows Peter down for just a split second, allowing for the Punisher to unload on Peter. God, imagine if they introduced Frank Castle in the MCU and then they immediately did something like this. Number 2, what if Kraven the Hunter had killed Spider-Man? Released in 1990, written by Richard Howell. Yeah, judging by this title alone, this one's a little sad. I figured we're already on the Spider-Man misfortune train, so I had to throw this one in next, you know? What if Kraven had killed Spider-Man? Okay, so we start with Pete patrolling the streets when he's suddenly trapped by Kraven in a net, and just like that, he unloads, killing Peter Parker. And of course, he eats a bunch of spiders and suits up himself to celebrate. Yeah, you eat a bunch of spiders, now you're Spider-Man. That's how it works. I think a human eats like, what, 7 spiders in a year when they're sleeping? So we have like, what, 7,000 to go? So now he's Spider-Man, just like that, cool. Meanwhile, MJ is like, where on earth is that Peter Parker guy? And then MJ is approached by a couple of thugs, and then in comes Spider-Man to save her. Only it's Kraven, but she doesn't know that. But she can tell something's up because Spider-Man doesn't recognize her, and he's way more brutal with taking out these thugs. So Cap, Daredevil, and Human Torch jump in to see what's up with the wall crawler. They did a decent job of wearing down the beast, but he needed more power. He ate a bunch of spiders earlier, so now it's only fair if he tries to eat Spider-Man's dead body, right? Comics are weird. So MJ tells Cap and the gang that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker, and that the Spider-Man is indeed not the same. And then Aunt May goes into denial hearing about the news. She's messed up now for life. And the media isn't happy with the tension between supers and the public. The story ends with MJ standing at Peter's funeral, wondering how things could have been. God, Peter just can't catch a break, eh? Oh my God. And finally, number 1, the saddest of them all, what if Wolverine father. Written by Rob Williams, released in 2011, we start off with Wolverine taking out the Winter Soldier. And we see a world with Wolverine and Daken if they had spent their life growing together as father and son. So now we get to see what it would have been like if Logan was there for them the whole time. Now in this reality, they're named John. This life, however, was filled with repression and lies and led to John leaving his home and rising up as Daken, becoming the leader of the Japanese underworld. So Wolverine tried to save him, but because of the way he was raised with this version of Logan, he looked at him like a monster. He viewed himself as a monster too. "This is the Muramasa blade, John," says Logan as he stabs him. "Healing factors don't work on it." The issue ends with the boy dying beside his father, and Logan uses the same blade on himself. And that's the end. That's the end of the comic. Everyone dies, everyone's sad. That's what ifs for you, right there.